Good afternoon. Welcome back to the room. This is the third academic session, Movements of Refugees, Internally Displaced Persons and Returnees. We have wonderful three speakers, and we'll look into exploring different dimensions of displacement dynamics, from relocation economics to return decisions and also IDP patterns. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, María Urbina from the World Bank, who's one of the authors of Beyond Camps and Communities, The Economics of Refugees Relocation in Bangladesh. The floor is yours.
Back. Yeah. Okay. So, hello. Thank you for having me. My name is María Urbina. Yeah. Now. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is María José Urbina from the World Bank. Today, I will present a joint work with my mentor, Sandra Rosso and Christina Weiser. The name of the paper is Beyond Camps and Communities, The Economics of Refugee Relocation in Bangladesh. So with this paper, what we try to answer is the, they have the, Domenico? Sorry, they have the old version, I think. Okay. Oh, okay. So, sorry, wait me a minute. I sent another version of the presentation. Oh, okay. That one is fine. Okay. So, yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry. So what we try to do with this paper is to try to answer the following question: is what happens when a government relocates refugees to a remote purpose-built settlement? We studied this in the context of Bangladesh. Working. Sorry, this is not working. Okay. So, so why does this matter? So, as the last release of UNHCR report, today there are approximately 117.2 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. And we really don't know how to host them, so we are still trying to answer how to host them into the society. So the literature, traditionally the literature and the policy debate has started to formal models to integrate them into the society. So one of those is refugee camps, and the other is to integrate them into the society. There is a high literature study both models, but there is a third model that hasn't been studied so much. So it's to isolate them in a purpose-built remote settlements. So with this paper, we will try to fill this gap. So let me start with the context. So who are the Rohingyas? The Rohingyas are a minority Muslim group who used to live in Myanmar's Rakhine state. In August of 2017, they decide to make a strike against the government, and in response, the government kills them on sight. Because of that, they need to flee the country as fast as they can in a condition of refugee. Approximately in 2017, 700,000 of Rohingya arrived into Bangladesh, and the government needs to build a Cox's Bazar refugee camp to host them. This refugee camp became overpopulated rapidly. Just to give you an idea, in Cox's Bazar, approximately, there are one refugee each 10.7 square meters. And for UNHCR, the minimum is approximately 45 square meters. So because of that, the government decides to launch the project of Basanchar. So what is Basanchar? So Basanchar is a slit of island that literally emerged because of the environment. The island is 60 kilometers offshore in the Bay of Bengal. The government used this island to equip and host refugees there. They invest approximately $3 million USD to equip it with hospitals, solar powers, embarkments, housing clusters. On the paper, it sounds amazing, and actually the refugees were happy to go there at the beginning. But there is a really big structural problem that it's super far away from the mainland. So to bring food there is expensive. There is no an option to commute and go to the mainland because it's like 2 to 3 hours trip by boat to get there. So at the beginning, there were a really huge debate among ONGs because they think that this will be like a prison for the refugees. But in 2021, UNHCR went there, assessed the conditions, and accept the program. So they start the project, but the government claimed that they will send, that all the people that go there, it will go there voluntarily. But as we read and we try to search, there's no formal criteria to decide who will go there. So we did a web scraping, and what we found is that between 2019 and 2025, most all news says that the relocation was non-voluntary. The people actually were super afraid to go there because they need to leave their families and they don't know when they are gonna see them again. So let me start how we do the evaluation. So our paper draws on 3 sources of data. The Cox's Bazar panel survey, we use the wave of 2019 and 2023, and also we use the Basanchar survey. All three surveys has the same design, so we can fully comparable. We use the 2019 wave to extract the pre-relocation variables to the 2023 wave, like the control group of the people that stay on Cox's Bazar, and the Basanchar survey as the treatment group, the people who fled, who leave the country. So, as there's no formal selection criteria, we can use this as a quasi-experimental design. So the best that we can do is to use 2 complementary methodologies. We do an adjusted mean comparison, a simple t-test, and also we do a propensity score matching. We do the propensity score matching by using the following variables: age, sex, student status, reading ability, household size, and number of children. We know that the propensity score matching can control for observable heterogeneity, but cannot control for unobservable variables that may persist. So our results are descriptive. We cannot claim causal of this. So let's start with the results. So I will start by the food security dimension. As we can see, with all the different indicators that we use, Bas and Shar, the people in Bas and Shar have worse outcomes than the people in Cox's Bazar. So we studied 3 dimensions: food consumption score, dietary diversity score, and frequency of food. The food consumption score, we follow the methodology of the World Food Program. So what it does, it takes 25 food items, and it weighted with nutritional values. And it composed it in a complete index, which we can see that is 44% lower with the people in Bas and Shar. The same with dietary diversity score, that is the different food groups that the refugees eat during the previous week, and the frequency of food, that is the number of times that the people eat that food groups. We composite this in just one index, and the ATT, what we found is that the refugees in Bas and Shar has 5.6 lower standard deviation in the food consumption index. And this dimension, this is pretty alarming because we are not comparing this with people that is well nourished. We compare this with people that is under bad conditions. So a reduction of 5.6 standard deviation is huge. So let's go to the health dimension. In this dimension, we studied 2 indicators. The first one is physical illness prevalence, and we also studied the mental health. So the physical illness prevalence, we do like a mean. It's a mean that is the average of binary indicators. Whether the respondent report experienced one illness the previous week. We include their chest pain, cold symptoms, cough, hypertension, difficult breathing, diarrhea, or physical injury. And as we can see, the people in Bas and Shar have 2.7 percentage point higher probability to experience a physical illness prevalence. The same with mental health. We use the PHQ scale, and as we can see, there is a 6.2 percentage point more probability to experience severe depression. So what we can see is that the relocation program appears to have exacerbate these conditions rather than alleviating them. And as I told you in the food dimension, this is really alarming as we are comparing this with people that is already depressed, already in really bad health conditions. But why we are seeing these results? Like, in the island, there's just primary care. So if they are experiencing another condition, they need to take a boat to go to the mainland to receive attention. So in the trip, conditions can get worse. Additional, like isolation, they experience more lower social support, which is directly correlated with mental health conditions. So what we can see until now is like the relocations apparently high amplified the vulnerability of dimension of these refugees. So we started labor market as well. In this dimension, we started employment, weekly hours worked, and labor market wages. In the only indicator that we managed to find like a result. It was in monthly wages, and as we can see, the people in Basanchar have a 45% less monthly wages than the people in Cox's Bazar. That's not surprisingly. In the people in the island just rely on in the humanitarian NGOs works. There's nothing around them, so they just can work in what the humanitarian organizations offer. There's no commercial networks. Actually, the soil in the island is a saline soil that the island is not. We cannot do agriculture there. Also, I forgot to tell at the beginning, but the island is located in high-risk cyclone zone, and they are threatened by high sea rise level all the year. So, now that we already said, like, the people in Basanchar are worse in the welfare dimension, so like, now we wanna estimate how it costs to live there, like how it costs to the government to have the people in Basanchar. So what we do is that we collect detailed data on per capita cost of hosting refugee in each location. We disaggregate this by humanitarian sector. So these are the dimensions that we study: food security and nutrition, protections, shelter and settlements, wash, health, and education. So what we do, we take the last budget that Bangladesh released, and we took the percentage of that is destined to the budget, like 25 to 30% to food security and nutrition, 5 to 10% to protection, and so on. And we estimate the costs in Basanchar and in Cox's Bazar. So as we see, we can see that in Basanchar, every humanitarian sector is expensier than in Cox's Bazar. As we see, as I already told, the island is isolated. So to take food there is expensier, to provide services is difficult. So the remoteness of the island, it's like, it makes more difficult, like everything. So after our estimations, that what we can conclude is to host a refugee in Basanchar is 3 times more expensive to have a refugee in Cox's Bazar. And in these estimations, we are not taking into account that the first investment that the government needs to do to host a refugee in Basanchar. It approximately, this is in purple, like approximately the government needs to invest $10,000 per refugee in Basanchar, because to equip that island was super expensive at the beginning. So what this paper found, what we found with this paper, it's 2 core findings. So well-being deficits and fiscal inefficiency. So if we have worse outcomes and higher costs, why we are still going with this project? So with this paper, we have these conclusions of the policy implications. So this model is not sustainable at all. High fiscal cost plus poor outcomes. There is not a good humanitarian strategy. Also, connectivity matters above all. Like the things that geographic and economic isolation from the mainland make that all the things like to provide services and food to the refugees is super expensive. Labor market access is not negotiable. There's a lot of evidence that says that if you regulate refugees and you allow them to go into the labor market, they will be more productive, and also you can promote self-reliance. Like they are just gonna rely on humanitarian aid, and they are just confined to live always with the help of the government. So with these papers, we call for a fundamental reform, like this model needs to be reassessed. So policy implications, like this paper already carried significant political weight. We received like an email from the government there, like because of this and because it's super expensive and we have this empirical evidence, they suspended for the relocation of the Rohingya to this island. They declared this project not viable, and the officials advocate to shut it down. Now, there are a lot of people that remain there, and the government is trying to figure it out what they are gonna do with the people that is living there. So this is the paper. So if you have a question, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I also realized that I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Nodoka Hasegawa from IFC UNHCR Joint Initiative, and I worked in Bangladesh, going back and forth from Cox's Bazar to Bhasan Char. So I really appreciate the research team to look into this case and to draw evidence and tell the story to the world. If you have any questions, we have about 6-7 minutes. And also, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Imadul Islam. Actually, I'm working in the Sasagao Peace Foundation. I'm from Bangladesh. So I first thank you. It's a very interesting research. I haven't any debate on it, but I would like to share some of the ground reality. When the Bhasan Char actually built by the previous regime, that means the Sheikh Hasina regime. So I was actually that time part of these negotiations. Actually, you know, the Rohingya refugee crisis never can be solved because repatriation is a myth due to the sum of uncertain situations. Then the government is thinking, how can they relocate them? So there was local diplomat, they give the ideas to the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, we can do in that way. In a practical ground, in the Cox's Bazar, it's again the kind of jail. They cannot go out. And the situation inside the Cox's Bazar, it's comparatively worst. And our research, we found that in last 1 year, there is a more than 200 group. They are more active that is in the biggest security risks. So that is the concern of the Bangladesh government positions. The data that you show that in Bangladesh government decisions, they again rethink because it's the thing is you shared, it's January during the Professor Yunus regime, because he was not motivated on that Bhasan Char ideas. But Bangladesh has no position actually to do it, any other options, because it's very, very overpopulated. Last 6 months, they also, again, due to the Arakan armies, they're slaughtering people in there, again 150,000 people fled to there. So my one small question, since Rohingya issue is a very big political settlement, if these findings very respectfully actually share with the government, Bangladesh new government, maybe in my ideas, it would be give them a wrong message, because I know that in my capacity, they are in the dilemma, what should they do? Because even in the Cox's Bazar camp, it's very, very overcrowded. And so as a researcher, there is, Bhasan Char is very nice actually, I also there. But why their mental condition and other things actually bad than Cox's Bazar areas? So as you mentioned in your research, yes, relocation budget is more costly, definitely there. But my idea is the international community at the very beginning, they don't like to actually go to the Basanchor due to the remoteness to cover there. And the previous regime, that means Professor Yunus regime, they are actually reluctant to continue only for the jealousy, because it's the initiative of the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So what should be the exact message? Because if they are not going to in the good positions, that means even it's isolated, but they are in the Cox's Bazar still in very bad situations. So what is the alternative? And how can actually motivate the new government that just on board 3 months ago to solve these issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's any other question, I would like to collectively take.
This is more on the analysis. I'm not in favor of moving anybody to the island, but I was wondering if you have a sense of how much of this is selection, in the sense of I imagine a lot of people that moved to the island probably was doing already bad in the camps. And in a second place, WFP food scores usually suffer a lot more for variety rather than calories. So I don't know if you have a sense if how much calories they're actually consuming, or yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Mine is not a question, but I just want to reflect on the perspectives of Somalia. Somalia have 4 million IDPs, and the government have provided land to these IDPs. Each district which is hosting IDPs or refugees have provided land. As well, in Mogadishu, the capital city, where the land is a lot, there's no land. So private sector has come up and provided 10,000 land allocation. So, and then they will provide the electricity, the water, and also there is nearby fish factory and a lot. So we see this provision of land to the IDPs from the government and the private sector is a very developmental way. There was a discussion that we had with the World Bank for a new project, call it upgrading informal settlements. And we asked them, what do you mean upgrading informal settlements? Informal settlements are the 2,000 IDP settlements in Somalia now, which they are gatekeepers, they are owners who have not provided title deeds with the IDPs. So if you are investing somebody's land, and then after 2 years, they will remove the IDPs. So we told them that we need a government or a private sector land, which we also hand over the title deed to the IDP or to the refugees. So and we are aiming for the next 2 years to relocate 20,000 IDPs as per our Solutions Pathway Action Plan, which is targeting to find 1 million IDPs for durable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Maria, if you can concisely respond to those comments and questions.
So I will go with the first question. So what to do with the Rohingya? So as we work with Sandra Rosso in this refugee agenda, we will always advocate to integrate them into the society, because we think that we need to make these people self-productive, like they need to be self-reliant. I know that what you said, the Cox's Bazar refugee camp is one of the most congested camps in the world. They experiment a lot of security issues. That it's completely true. But confine them in isolated place, it seems not to be the solution. Like, as you said, like okay, they can be in a better place to live, but they are far from their own families. You can see in the news that some of them, they were just separated to their own mother, father, because most of the people that were relocated there were young people. So that's what I'm gonna say. So Joaquin, so no, we didn't take into account the calories. That it's a really good question, suggestion. And how about the selection? Yes, true. We can control for observable variables. That is the one that I chose. And there is difference. We did the t-test in the outcomes, and there is difference. This is why we claim that our results are descriptive. There's no formal selection criteria, so we don't have a clean quasi-experimental design that allows us to claim causality, to use a formal identification. And what is the name of, sorry? Okay. So no, as you said with the IDPs, that's true. Actually, they were telling me that the private sector didn't want to go there because this is the island is located in a zone that is high cyclone prone. There is a constant threat of high sea rise level. So there's no, the private sector, they are not gonna have any profit to go there. So it's an isolated place. So what you said, that it happened there, this is, I think this, in here, there is not, actually an option.
That was great. Thank you very much, Maria.
Okay.
And yes. We will now move on to the second presenter, Miguel Ruiz. War and Internal Displacement is the title of his paper. The floor is yours.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. Today I will be presenting this paper. It's pretty special to me because this is a paper I worked and presented a lot in 2019 as my job market paper, and it brought me to Australia. I'm a Spanish, almost to be Australian researcher, currently working at the World Bank and based in Melbourne. And typically when I presented this paper, the title gave some information, but in this conference, it does need a bit more. So this paper is going to be a paper that is using data with very precise geographical location to try to estimate where people are relocated. This is strictly a prediction effort and a prediction exercise when we're trying to see where people are going to be displaced to better target aid. So the latest figures for IDPs and refugees worldwide are large. When this paper is going to be based in Iraq in around 2015. And back then, the situation was already dire. And in particular, in Middle East was currently undergoing a lot of active conflict. We have the Syrian war, and the Arab Spring, and only in 2015, there were 8.5 million new IDPs displaced in the Middle East. And of those, about 4 million were displaced in Iraq. So as I was saying, this paper will use data with very precise geographical information, which is something that typically is increasingly available these days. And having this type of data allows us to link it to the wealth of other geographical information systems that we have, be it the night lights that we've mentioned before, or other population density measures, and just an entire wealth of data sets. And again, the question that I'm mostly interested in this paper is very, very simple. It's literally, where are you going? Or if I can somehow help predicting where people are going to be moving, then that will also allow me to choose the mode of help that I can provide, when and where to give it, of course, which in the case of emergency responses, I think timing is of the essence. And without further ado, I'll say that in Iraq, during this conflict, IDPs were highly concentrated within 20 miles of conflict. The highest concentration happens extremely close to conflict, where it peaks at even at the same 2 square mile radius, and it decreases with distance and time. And when it comes to the characteristics of the locations IDPs choose, these will be locations in highly populated areas within like close distance to main roads. And an additional finding is that areas that do not have a clear ethno-religious majority tend to host more IDPs than other regions. Again, this is, and I repeat, not causal, there's no causal identification in this model, so we have to take this as a grain of salt, or if you want, as say, descriptive evidence of things that we could potentially look into. I know it's late, so the method that I'm going to be doing is just an effort to put together these relatively complicated data into a statistical model where I can draw some useful information out of it. So I'm going to label it a nonlinear network model with spatial parameter restrictions. For those familiar with the literature, it will simply be a network model where instead of going as rigid as using a spatial weight matrix, as in spatial econometrics, I'm only going to impose restrictions for the parameters in my network matrix based on distance, but I'll go more into detail. Okay, so to voice back the first speakers on the opening note, I just wanted to remind myself that there's people behind all of these data points that we will be talking about now. And one of the main motivations of the paper is precisely that predicting where people are going to go is very difficult. In this case, I'm using the previous conflict in Iraq to just show an instance where prediction was very challenging and IDP needs were not met. And essentially, in the conflict between 2006 and 2007, a lot of IDP camps were set up awaiting for these IDP waves, which were expected to be coming in as a result of the conflict of the US coalition and in Iraq, but nobody showed up. So after like a substantial period of time, some of these camps were dismantled, and it was only then when IDPs showed up. So again, it's so for a quick background for the country itself, it's not on this slide. I think one of the very important background information is that the Syrian war starting in 2011 had UNHCR and other colleagues already with their hands full dealing with Syrian refugees in the country. But in addition to that, when the Arab Spring arrives to Iraq in 2011, and it unfolds from peaceful protests to violent conflict all the way into a full-scale civil war in 2014, where the main actors would be ISIS versus government forces and other allies. On the two charts that, not sure if they're legible, but on the left-hand side, you have just the stock of internally displaced people in Iraq during that period of time. It goes from the first observation that we have when the data collection was set up was about like 250,000 people already, and it goes all the way up, oscillating. Some people are returning, some people are not. Will really depend on the situation at their origin. But we're like oscillating around like 3.5 million people displaced constantly during that time. And if you see the other graph, that will show just the death toll and show how, however non-peaceful Iraq could be during peace times, this is clearly a very important conflict event. This time around, this conflict had a lot of press, in part due to the testimony of Nadia Murad, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And that gave some visibility to IDPs worldwide, and I feel like that was one of those few instances where they got a bit of the spotlight as opposed to refugees. On the left-hand side is just a quick sneak peek on what the data is going to be looking like. But just to offer more background, I'm just trying to get you all with me on this sort of on the boat to try to see what's the best way to try to predict this. And as an econometrician, you're just behind your computer. You don't have access to a lot of this context, but it really shapes which models to use and what to do. So the first and most important characteristic is that both conflicts and IDPs are geographically spread and also over time. So you do have a lot of space variation and a lot of time variation, which will allow me to capture some patterns. The second is that ISIS is involved in almost all of these conflict events. 75% of this would be ISIS having a militant versus militant type of conflict where civilians do not need to necessarily be involved, but there's a very large portion of conflict, this 23%, which is strictly acts of genocide or like militias targeting civilians. The third important feature is that this is coming from surveys done by IOM as well on this population, is that generalized violence is the main cause of displacement and not specific targeting based on identity, which again, I will come back to this, of course, but this is the literature, one of the main, I guess, differences between IDPs in different parts of the world is whether, what's the leading cause for this displacement, and in this case, at least like this is not reported to be like political or religious persecutions, does not seem to be the leading cause. And then finally, and it's not that I'm going to delve too much into this, but I think it's important to say that at least at the time this analysis was taking place, people really wanted to go home, back home as soon as it was safe. Of course, we saw some art about Mosul and like the state of Mosul at the end of this war. It was obviously impossible to go back. So, there's a lot of heterogeneity also within the country. And finally, at least in this conflict, only 3% of IDPs were staying in camps, which at the time I thought it was interesting. Okay, so for the data, I would say this is a little bit of a celebration of success in data collection and data creation. For conflict, I'm going to be using one of the two main data sets that collect data internationally on any country that you can think of, and this is a program run in the Uppsala University in Sweden, and you have the geocoded event data set. And I'll go into it a bit more. The alternative would be to use the AC LED dataset, which is also, these are the two main sources of, they are collected using newspaper articles and cross-reference and so on, but still these are, if you are working in a region where, like say, criminal data is perhaps not readily available or administrative data collection is challenging, you do have these two sources of data for conflict, which are very, very handy. And then the other main part of data is coming from the IOM displacement tracking matrices that were run in Iraq during this time. And today we've discussed cuts in funding, but for some reason, during this period in Iraq, there's this very precise data on IDPs, and they don't have it for other countries, but they did for Iraq at this time. And finally, because we have an exact geographical location for both conflict and IDPs, we can link this to anything that we can think of. And that's what I'll be showing here. So I'm gonna go, yeah. So in terms of the conflict data, we do have a very granular data. This will be, in this case, as you can see, it's like 3.3 thousand observations. These are events, and an event is any clash between two agents where there's at least one death, and when one of the two agents is a military faction. So it has to be, there's some rigor, right? So it's not that, say, I don't know, like a theft or it's trying to map more like, there has to be a military faction involved. And in this case, yeah, we can see we have a lot of observations over time and in a lot of different locations that will allow us to disentangle some patterns in the data. When it comes to the displacement tracking matrix, what we have here are essentially the IOM is tracking the stock of internally displaced people in Iraq every other week over the course of this conflict, which was remarkable. And I'm just going to show some descriptives to show the intuition behind what is the variation that we're exploiting. On the map on the screen now, you can see just the geographical extension of the conflict and all the IDPs located in Iraq during this time. And what this map does not show is the temporal variation of this, so which is also part of what I will be exploiting. So the idea is that we have conflict happening at different locations at different time, and we also have IDP numbers increasing in different locations at different times. When it comes to the space-time variation, if you see, this is the initial period in Iraq, where you do have some camps with some people near Baghdad, and this is Iraq after, like on the very last period of observation. I can also zoom in on the Mosul. Mosul is where those tiny dots are in the middle. The dots itself cover the word Mosul, but that's Mosul. So this is the initial period, and this is the final period, right? So you see how, you know, the variation in numbers is dramatic. From an empirical perspective, what I can do with this type of data, this richness, is to essentially merge anything as if it was just a layer cake. So I'll take the geographical location for conflict and IDPs, and I'll merge it with anything that I can get my hands in or I think is relevant. In this case, just to, you know, because it's late, just to run you through a few nice maps. This is the, you know, land scan, population density in Iraq. We also have like nightlight that may be a proxy for population density, economic activity, or it has other applications. I also have some ethnic composition by regions in Iraq. This is coming from another paper, but it essentially measures so, for example, an area would be considered Sunni if the political party voted in that district in 2011 was like a clearly Sunni party. So it's like measuring like ethno-religious majority at a given district. I will also have access to Iraqi roads, which was another important part, like trying to have some notion of like how connected IDPs would like to be, or are forced to be. And then finally, having access to this freedom allows me to do two things, and these will be the core elements of the methodology. So on the one hand is going to be how do I finally organize all of this data, and the other one will be the exact econometric specification that I use. But when it comes to the unit of analysis, this of course plays into what model to use. And we could use provinces or we could use districts, but we have a lot of richness in the data, so we can also divide the populated area of Iraq in 2 miles by 2 mile squares and have that be our unit of analysis. And the choice for this is because that will allow us to have a very precise estimation of, you know, where people will actually relocate. However, when you do this and you have thousands of, and then, you know, all of these cells, it becomes a problem that is just simply not computationally feasible. So you need to make some assumptions. But just to be clear, after we collect the data, we are collecting all the information from different sources into this grid. And each of these squares, each of these grid units is going to be the unit of observation that we will track over time, over 72 periods, and see what happens. We will track number of conflict events, number of IDPs, whether it's connected or not to a main road, etc. Yeah, so that's it. In more intuition, it's just like a panel where each grid square is a unit of observation. Okay. Now, for the most fun part of the presentation, which are the equations, I'm offering you just a linear, or not a linear, but like a regression in matrix form, which is essentially the same as we were seeing before, only I have collected elements into a column vector y, which would be, if you think each unit of that column will be yi. And then the network matrix would be just a way of generalizing an OLS type of equation where each observation is assumed to be independent. But in this case, we're saying, well, they may not be. And in fact, when I'm choosing my unit of observation to be so small, it becomes ever more challenging to argue that there will be no spillover effects. So what I'm doing with this is simply to illustrate that this is just a generalization of a simple linear regression. If we were to go into the world of spatial econometrics, that would be applying or estimating a single parameter, assuming that we know the structure of interactions. And that is, typically, we are going to assume that, say, conflict events that happen closer to me have more impact on my decisions. But from the econometrician side, I don't want to make that assumption. I want to let the results tell me that, as opposed to just mechanically having it. Okay, now the problem with trying to estimate this N matrix as it stands is that it's way too many parameters. So I need to impose some restrictions, but it feels like an IID model feels like it's a bit too restrictive. We can do a little bit better with perhaps a spatial matrix, but it's still too restrictive. We can do a bit better, and then we go to somewhere in between. So what I do is essentially, I say, well, N has too many parameters. How do I find like a midpoint? So I impose parameter restrictions based on this spatial weight matrix. Or I simply do an estimation by rings. So what I'm saying is that there is some regularities, and from my location of origin, all conflict that appears near me has the same impact as long as it's at the same distance. And I can like discretize the space a little bit, so it's not exactly one ring for each different distance, but rather, I am taking my own cell, like 2 by 2, that's one regressor. The next cell is going to be from 2 to 4 miles, and I'm constructing rings like this, assuming that from an IDP perspective, when at the moment of making your decision, whether the conflict happens in that direction or that one, it does not affect my decision. It might affect where I go, but it does not affect my decision to go. So that's what I do. And that's very handy because it also allows me to transform the problem. So estimating that is very difficult, but if you impose the restrictions, we're having these regularities, you can actually manipulate the matrices a little bit, group the parameters that you want to estimate, and what you can have are regressors that are simply the aggregated conflict or by rings, which then makes this a very easy program to run through Stata. So that's what I do. This is more like the formal equation, and I'm not going to take you through it. Just will add that I'm going to show you 2 different variations of the results. One where I'm using fixed effects for each individual cell location, in which technically I'm beyond the fixed effects at such a tiny level. The variation that I'm playing with are conflict, IDPs, and lacks of both. And then finally, I'm also using a functional form for this instead of being fully linear, because I don't expect displacement to happen immediately, but rather conflict may have some sort of accumulation before it triggers. So I don't want to impose a linear, Okay. So, and these are the results. So as I guess expected, conflict very close to the origin leads to the highest number of displacement. And this effect dissipates with distance. But it dissipates quite quickly because by 40 miles, 50 miles, you no longer observe these correlations between conflict events and displaced people. But again, what I showed before, and I was talking about rings, but the backline of all this, as I mentioned, is that we have 72 periods of observation. So we do have also a spatial dimension to this. what you can see on this graph is if you take the line that would be closest to the miles axis, that would be the line that I just plotted. And the rest are simply lags of conflict at those distances. And what you see is that conflict is like at the same location and 2 miles apart. It's quite persistent over time, but it drops after 5 months. That's at the very back of the graph. But like after 40, 50 miles, the effect completely dissipates for all time frames. Okay, now if I drop the fixed effects from the estimation and I bring back some of these time invariant features that I had, such as the ethno-religious composition, the proximity to roads, etc., like I can also see what's the impact or what's the correlation between some of these time invariant characteristics of the locations with the number of IDPs. And what I find is that, I'll start with the top, is that locations where there is no clear ethno-religious identity host more IDPs relative to the others. In this case, the baseline would be locations without a clear ethno-religious majority, and those would be the results, or these negative results for like locations that have that religious majority. When it comes to the physical characteristics, we see that people stay in highly populated areas and within like a close distance to roads. And then we don't, or I don't deal with identification here, but at the very least, I deal with, say, how good does this model perform with respect to others, right? So in this table here, I'm just showing you the performance of, on the first rows is just the in-sample comparison, comparing the different models with models where I'm using district or governorate, the provinces of Iraq. And then I also show how, it, especially when it's out of sample, that's when this model outperforms the others. Yeah, and finally, so wrapping up, sorry. The main finding is that IDPs choose locations really close to conflict. And this can in itself make providing aid ever more challenging. We haven't talked about this part of the literature today, but there's, you know, militias capturing part of the aid is a concern, or simply access to these locations that are so hot can also be a concern. Today, we were also talking about cuts and how maybe at the policy level, the type of aid gets cut. If I remember correctly, I think it was May McDonald mentioned that at some point, cash transfers were removed. And that was, towards the end of this conflict, the main type of aid that was given to refugees, sorry, to IDPs. So if that type of decision happens for a political reason, you might be depriving people in vulnerable situations from the one type of aid that they can actually profit from. Yeah, finally, most IDPs in Iraq did not choose to stay in camps, and they had other types of arrangements, staying with relatives, renting. But this paper does not really delve into whether this happened. I don't know, because I don't have a causal identification of the reason why these camps were not more used by them. And then, yeah, so again, IDPs choose locations in populated areas close to main roads. This also speaks to the fact that, based on some of the surveys that IOM also run, it seems that most IDPs, or many IDPs, try to preserve their normal source of income. So they're still doing their job. It's just that if you are in a highly conflicted area, as a local, you might have information about, okay, I know I don't want to, if I have a house next to the parliament, I don't want to be there, but maybe it's safe for me to be in the outskirts, and I can still continue to do life as normal whenever it's possible, right? And then the final finding would be that IDPs choose locations that are more diverse, but again, this is part of the, it's a non-causal identification, so just take with a grain of salt, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for the insightful presentation. We are running out of time, so I will take one question from the room. Okay, I see one person. And I will direct the questions, other questions, directly to Miguel after this session or after today's session.
Hi, Chao from UNHCR. Thanks, a very extensive study, and also the conclusion is interesting. Is very interesting because also a little bit surprising, I would say, because it seems that the distance of the displacement is not quite far away from the location of the conflict. I might miss that part. Like, does the severity of the conflict affect that displacement zone? And also, I'm wondering if there are two conflicts quite close to each other. Will there be any interactions of that, or will that geographical patterns be reinforced somehow from the simulation? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so when it comes to say, competing conflicts, it could be that if they are relatively at a similar distance to you, like in the model that I'm using, because of the regularization, they might land in the same indifference ring, so where all these conflicts happen. It could also be that that's not the case, right? So if you have simultaneous conflicts at very close and not so close and so on, like that could be a problem for this prediction model for sure. Like it's not prepared to do that. I do have some versions of the model where I also include extended interactions between these rings, and in those, that type of movement would be captured, but those interactions do not lead to significant parameters.
Thank you very much. We will move on to the last speaker of this session, Charlie, who was with the UNHCR team in Jordan. The title of the paper is Determinants of Syrian Refugees' Return. Over to you, Charlie.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Charlie Chen Fang, and I'm a statistics assistant in UNHCR Jordan. And this paper is about determinants of Syrian refugees' return. It's a joint work with my supervisor, Marguerite, and the economist from World Bank, Irving and Daniel. So in this paper, we provided the quantitative evidence about what are the driving forces or determinants for refugees, Syrian refugees living in Jordan to return to Syria. So in this paper, we examine the conditions under which Syrian refugees decide to return to their country after the fall of the Assad regime in the end of 2024, which is 2024 December 8th. And our paper fills a research gap in the literature where empirical evidence on the actual return behavior remains scarce, because most of the empirical research now are using the intention to return as a proxy of the refugees' return behavior. But we use the actual return behavior to fill this research gap. Our data and identification relies on the UNHCR administrative database, and we merged the database with different micro-level individual data to provide a full picture about what is the determinants for Syrian refugees' return. And we matched the individual data, level data with the border return record, which is provided by Jordanian government. And we use this data to capture the actual returns rather than the intentions. Our empirical approach is very straightforward. We just use a very linear probability model, and we incorporated control variables and some interesting variables such as the welfare proxy, the cash assistance status, and the integration, socioeconomic integration to check if these variables have some effect on the likelihood of return. And our empirical approach compares the determinants between the refugees living in the camps and the refugees living outside of the camps, which is living in the host communities in Jordan. In Jordan, there are 1/5, nearly 18% Syrian refugees living in camps. And the most camps are situated in the border of Jordan. So this is the preview of our key findings. We found that men are more likely to return, and the most returnees originated from Dara, the government of Dara and Homs of Syria, and they are more likely to return there. And for the refugees living in camps, we find a dynamic relationship between the poverty and return. And we run the regression monthly to check the dynamics of the coefficient, and we find the relationship changes a lot. And for the refugees living in host communities, we find that households with more children are more likely to return, and we use the welfare proxy to divide the refugees into different levels in different rankings, and we found the link between the welfare and the actual return behavior is U-shaped, which means the poorest and the relatively wealthy refugees are more likely to return. And we introduced the natural experiment because the loss of cash assistance is very important for refugees for their decisions to return. And we found that if the refugee lost cash assistance, that will lower their return, the probability for return for the poorest refugees, but will increase the probability to return for the relatively better off refugees. And we also checked the temporary winter transfers of cash, and we found the temporary cash transfer in the end of 2024 winter act as an extra resource to prepare for refugees to return. And in the end, we introduced the variables of socio-economic integration, and we found that the access to education and the formal work will slightly reduce the probability to return, but the magnitude are very marginal. About the data sources, we leverage 3 main data sets. The first one is UNHCR progress data, and this is the global refugee registration system. And in this system contains individual level data for each registered refugees, including the demographic variables, biometric variables, and some protection variables. And we merged this progress individual level data with the UNHCR cash assistance data. And the cash assistance is provided by the household in the household level, and this record are provided by the cash assist. And the cash assistance data the cash assistance is provided by the poverty targeting model, and it is methodology. The methodology of this poverty targeting model is shared by our co-authors from World Bank. And the third data set is the WFP UNHCR skills mapping data. We call it SKM. And the skills mapping survey is a comprehensive survey for all the Syrian refugees living in Jordan, aged from 18 to 64. This survey was conducted in 2023, includes variables such as the education background, the employment experience, and your aspiration for your work. And we use the progress data match the weekly updated returee list provided by Jordanian government, and our research contains all the returees updated to the end of 2025. So we just use a whole year returees list to check what are the determinants for the return. And our focus is adult Syrian refugees, which is near 50% of total UNHCR registered population. Because of the skills mapping survey has some attrition, so in the end, for the skills mapping subsample, there are only 200,000 adult Syrians, but we try to correct the attrition bias. About the key advantages of this dataset, we think it is comprehensive and the administrative coverage of the entire registered refugee population. And the administrative data will enable our analysis of actual return behavior and to capture the socioeconomic determinants. And it is very good to mitigate the selection and reporting bias. About the methodology, it is very straightforward. We leverage a linear probability model as our main specification. The Y variable or dependent variable is the dummy variable. If the refugee has returned to Syria, that is 1. If not, that is 0. And we try to control all of the fixed effects, such as the governor rate in country of origin, which is the governor rate of Syria, and also the governor rate in country of asylum, which is the governor rate you are living in Jordan. This is only for a non-camp group. Our estimation strategy includes 3 stages. The first stage, we just use the full sample, which is progress demographic data variables and the cash assistance variables. In the second stage, we introduced the poverty proxy, which is called PMT score. The score can be just considered as a welfare score. We use the poverty proxies to interact with the cash assistance status to capture the welfare heterogeneity in the determinants of return. In the third stage, we incorporate the variables from the skills mapping survey to introduce some socioeconomic variables, such as education background, employment experience, and your prior labor market experience. And all of the regressions and the empirical results are divided for camp refugees and host community refugees. And we found very different stories for these 2 groups, because this reflects distinct decision-making frameworks, given the 2 groups are very different in work opportunities, rent obligations, and access to the cash assistance. We just plot each coefficient and the confidence interval as a plot, and you can find the tables in the paper, and our paper is accessible on the conference website. And in these 2 figures just present the model 1 baseline returnee profile, and the left figure is the refugees living in camp, and the right figure is the refugees living in host community. I will just skip to our main findings. For refugees living in camps, all refugees will receive the cash assistance, so we just drop this variable. And for these 2 groups, we found very different incentive patterns. For example, for the variable child dependency ratio, we found a very positive and strong effect for non-camp residents, but insignificant for camp. And for the dummy variable, if the household has school-age child, this variable is negative and very strong for non-camp residents, but still insignificant for the refugees in camp. About the cash assistance effect, this is only for the non-camp refugees. We find that if you are a cash beneficiary, your probability to return will slightly decrease by 3 percentage points. If you are removed from the cash list in the past, your probability to return will increase a lot by 11 percentage points. And if you are added to the cash list temporarily, in the end of 2024, your return probability will increase by about 3 percentage points. And if you are added to the cash list, your probability to return will decrease about 9 percentage points, which is a net effect by the adding up the cash beneficiary and the re-added effect. And we also find very heterogeneous effect. Depends on what governorate you are from Syria, and we find the heterogeneity is very obvious. For the second model, we introduced more variables such as the welfare proxy and the change of your cash assistance status. And our main findings are as follows. Okay, and I will skip to that slide. For camp refugees, we find that in the early window of return, the relatively wealthier households are more likely to return, and the relationship then inverses itself. To show this dynamic relationship, we just do the regression monthly. So the monthly dynamic effects are presented here. The left figure is the refugees in camps, and we just run the linear probability model by month, and we plot the coefficient and the confidence interval by month, and we find that the effects are very significant in the June and in May and June in 2025, and the relationship just swapped after that. And the green line here is the PMT highest tercile, which means the group which are relatively well assisted in the camp, and the orange one is the lower tercile of PMT group, which means you are poorest in the camp. And we find the effect changed a lot. And for non-camp results, we find a U pattern relative to poverty. In our regression, we control a PMT lowest tercile and the PMT highest tercile, and the reference group is the middle tercile. And we find both the poorest and the relatively well-assisted refugees are more likely to return than the middle tercile. And the magnitude is about 3 percentage points. And the middle income group are the least likely to return, so we think it's a U-shape pattern or relationship. And the explanation or interpretation of this finding is that perhaps the relatively well-assisted refugees have the means, while the poorest ones have little holding them back. And the middle income group is sufficiently invested in the host community. And we also introduced the interaction terms with the change of your cash assistance, the change of your status of cash assistance and your welfare proxy. And we find that very intuitive effect that if you lost cash assistance and you are also the poorest household, and you will be even less likely to return. That is the interpretation that you cannot cover the relocation costs. In this third model, we controlled more variables such as the education and the labor outcomes. So our main findings are that for the education effects in camps, those with tertiary education are more likely to return. But for the refugees outside the camps, if you complete secondary or tertiary education, which will lower your probability to return, but the magnitude is very small, less than 2 percentage points. If you completed education in Jordan, will slightly decrease your probability of return. About the employment effects, if you are currently employed, your probability to return will decrease a little bit if you are living in camp, and also if you are living in the host communities, but very close to insignificant. And we use a work permit question as a proxy for if you are currently employed and your work is formal. And we find that if you are formally employed, your probability of return will increase if you are living in camps, but the probability of return will decrease significantly if you are living outside the camps. And the prior work experience means if you have work experience back in Syria, that means that will increase your return probability a little bit, no matter you living in camp or living in host communities. But overall, the economic integration seems to reduce likelihood of return, but the magnitude remains very small. So I'll stop here. I think we can have more time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for the clear presentation, and congratulations to the team to be able to draw early lessons from the administrative and pragmatic data to have trends on the early stages of return. We do have 7 minutes for questions. Please raise your hand if you have questions.
Hi, everyone. Emma here from JDC Research, currently based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for this very interesting paper. I have 2 comments. So I thought that this was great and really informative. The economic variables are sure very important, but I think also considering the context and conflict dynamics, I thought that it could be interesting to introduce a religious or ethnic group in the list of variables because, of course, a wealthy Kurdish or Christian or Alawi head of household might have radically different perceptions of return than a very wealthy Sunni head of households and perceptions of HTS, which is now the government. And something else that I think might be informative for this study, which is usually available from partners and very relevant for those 2 governorates specifically, is the rate of landmine contamination from where people are from, which can then drive urban returns versus rural areas. And then you could drive some more patterns from that. Thank you very much.
Really nice presentation. I was thinking about how much information you have about where people return to. In particular, I was thinking if the amount of destruction that the places where they are returning has something to do with the probability of them returning. Like you can use the global settlement layer or stuff like that to track how much destruction what is, and maybe that's super important to determine if people actually return or not. So I don't have you have any thoughts, or you thought about it, or.
There's a question here. I think an important variable that seems to be missing is duration of residence in the country. I wonder if you have that information, because that's, the literature shows that that's a key dimension of integration and possibly return. Also, year of arrival would also stand for selection in the immigration decision. If you have that information, you might want to especially interact it with the country of origin, because year of arrival interacted with country of origin can stand for war intensity in Syria at the time of immigration. You may want to control for that.
Thank you very much. I understand that this session also has the co-authors who might be contributing, but Charlie, would you like to first respond to some of the questions?
Let me first thank you for all the comments, and I will compliment for one point, because according our survey of recently conducted, we find that more than 80% of refugees will return to the origin of the government of their origin. So about this question, so we can now track very detailed information about where they returned, but we will try our best to use the survey data and the intentions to control this in our paper. And for other control variables, we will complement in the further stage. And our co-authors are online, so maybe they have something to.
Yes. Hi, and good afternoon from Amman. This is Marguerite Duponchel from UNHCR. Thanks a lot for all the comments, and thanks for the JDC for letting us join online. We would have loved to be in the room, but unfortunately this was not an option. On the heterogeneity of the group, what I want to flag is that the Syrians in Jordan there's no heterogeneity of the group, right? In terms of religion, everyone is Sunni. So this is why we didn't control, because there's no variation in the data. And the same, to some extent, apply on the length of time spent in a country of asylum, because the date of arrival, the period of arrival, was relatively contained, right? So I think refugees in Jordan arrived from 2012 to 2014, some of them a little bit later, but there is very little heterogeneity. On the question of the landmine situation in the country of origin, I mean, we control for the governorate of return. We proxy by a proxy, right? Which is, as Charlie said, your governorate of origin. So it is partly covered, not in details. I think it's one of the caveats, right, of the paper that we can flag, is that we don't have much on the data on the other side, right? Are people working? Do they have ability to find work? Do they have family present, still alive in Jordan? How close is the family? So all these aspects of return that are on the decision to return that are very important in the condition in the country of origin are not controlled for, aside from the fixed effects of the governorate of origin. And I have a really bad connection, so I missed some of the questions, but yeah, over to the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite and Charlie. I think this is perfect. I think we still are on time to move on to the next session. So this concludes this third academic session. Thank you very much to the three presenters, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.